The 15th of July, 1992. A warm Wednesday morning on Wimbledon Common, open London parkland, crossed by thousands of people every week without a second thought. One of the safest places in the city. At around 10:30, a young mother walked onto the common with her 2-year-old son and the family dog. Minutes later, she was dead. And the only witness to her murder was a boy who had just turned 2. His name was Alexander. He was found beside his mother's body, physically unhurt, and far too young to say what he had seen. Too young even to understand that she was not going to wake up. For 16 years, one question hung over this case. Who killed Rachel Nickell? But that is not the question this video is built around. Because when the answer finally came, it was not a stranger who had appeared from nowhere. The man who killed her was already known to the police. His name had reached them years before Rachel died, and nothing was done. This is not only the story of how a killer was caught, it is the story of how he was missed, more than once, across years. While the investigation looked in the wrong place entirely, the answer had been closer than anyone knew. Before she was a headline, Rachel Nickell was a person. She was 23 years old. She grew up in Essex and worked for a time as a model. By the summer of 1992, she was living in Balham in South London with her partner Andre Hanscom and their little boy Alexander. By every account, she was a warm, athletic, devoted young mother. Her whole world was her son. That Wednesday began like any other. Andre left for work. Racheal and Alexander stayed home for a while. Then they set out for their usual walk across Wimbledon Common, taking the family dog, a rescue named Molly. She chose the common on purpose. It was green, open, close to home, and considered safe. The kind of place a mother took a toddler precisely because nothing was supposed to happen there. In daylight, surrounded by dog walkers and joggers, the risk felt close to zero. That is part of what made the whole country recoil when it did happen. Rachel Nickell did nothing careless. She walked her child and her dog in a public park in the middle of a summer morning. Somewhere on the common, near a path in the trees, she crossed the path of a man. What happened next took only minutes. By the accounts of those nearby, it was fast, and it was almost silent. When it was over, Rachel was dead, and her 2-year-old son was standing beside her. The only living witness to what would become the most closely watched murder in modern British history. She thought it was one of the safest places in London. The scene that met the first officers was one they would not forget. Rachel had been sexually assaulted and stabbed repeatedly. The violence was extreme, and it was close. Her son had not been physically harmed, and he had stayed with her. The investigation that followed was enormous. This was a national story within hours. 54 detectives were assigned to the case. The public was frightened and furious in equal measure, and the pressure to find the killer was overwhelming from the first day. But the physical evidence was thin. In 1992, forensic science was nowhere near what it is today. Investigators recovered only a tiny trace of biological material from the scene. It was so small, and the techniques of the time so limited, that after weeks of work, the police still could not answer a basic question: whether Rachel's killer had even been a man or a woman. There was no usable fingerprint. There was no confession. There was, in effect, no forensic thread to pull, so the investigation reached for something else. They brought in a forensic psychologist. His name was Paul Britton, one of the best-known offender profilers in the country. His job was to describe the kind of person likely to have done this. He produced a profile. The killer, he said, was probably a young man, local, living alone, a sexual deviant, and a loner with an isolated inner life. In theory, a profile narrows the search. In practice, it did something more dangerous. It gave the investigation the shape of a guilty man before it had found any evidence of a real one. And once you are looking for a particular kind of person, you tend to find them. The profile pointed the investigation toward the people who used Wimbledon Common. So did a description, drawn from what little Rachel's son could recall. Both led toward the local dog walkers, and toward one man in particular who fit the picture almost exactly. But fitting a profile is not the same as being guilty, and the man who had actually killed Rachel Nickell was not among the dog walkers at all. He was elsewhere in South London, and, in ways no one had yet connected, he was already known to the police. The man the profile pointed to was Colin Stagg. Stagg was a local man who walked his dog on Wimbledon Common. He fit Britain's profile, and at the outset, that was essentially the entire case against him. Not fingerprint evidence, not DNA, not a witness. He matched a psychological sketch, and he used the park. If you know this case at all, you know what came next. It became one of the most criticized operations in the history of British policing. So we will move through it quickly. The police launched an undercover operation, later known as Operation Edzell. A female officer began writing to Stagg under a false name, Lizzie James. She posed as a woman interested in him, and over months, she drew him into sharing violent sexual fantasies, hoping he would let something slip or confess outright. He never did. At no point did Colin Stagg confess to killing Rachel Nickell, because, as would later be proven, he had not. Stagg was arrested and charged in August 1993 and held in custody to await trial. When the case reached the Old Bailey in 1994, the judge, Mr. Justice Ognall, examined how the evidence had been gathered. He was scathing. The operation, he said, amounted to deceptive conduct of the grossest kind. He threw the covertly obtained material out. Without it, the prosecution had nothing. The case never reached a jury. Colin Stagg walked free. This is the part it is essential to get right, because it is so often told wrongly. Colin Stagg was never convicted of anything. He was an innocent man, accused, charged, and held on remand for over a year, then cleared when the case fell apart before a jury ever heard it. The police had built their entire case on a psychological profile with no physical thread to hold it together. And while they spent those months building it, something else was happening in the same city, something no one on the Nickell team would look at. To understand what the investigation missed, you have to step away from the Nickell case for a moment and follow a separate trail that had been building alongside it. In 1989, 3 years before Rachel died, a woman was raped on Plumstead Common in southeast London. Around that time, a mother went to the police. What she told them only came to light years later. Her own son, she said, had admitted to raping a woman. She gave them his name. That name was Robert Napper. The police could not connect her report to a specific case, and nothing came of it. Through the early 1990s, a series of violent sexual attacks was recorded across southeast London. Across a stretch of parkland known as the Green Chain Walk, the unidentified attacker became known as the Green Chain Rapist. At one stage, Robert Napper was among the possible suspects, but investigators eliminated him. One reason given was his height. Their suspect had been described as relatively short, and Napper was well over 6 feet tall. There was more. Police records would later show something else. At one point, officers had sought a blood sample from Napper. By the account given in recent coverage of the case, he was asked to come in voluntarily, not arrested. He did not attend. When officers went to find him, he had gone. So by the time Colin Stagg was being pursued for Rachel's murder, Robert Napper had already been named to police in connection with a rape. He had already been looked at and set aside during a series of sexual attacks. On paper, he was exactly the kind of escalating, dangerous offender an investigation should have been closing in on. No one was closing in. He was free. And he was not finished. In November 1993, 16 months after Rachel Nickell was killed, Robert Napper attacked again, this time in Plumstead. This time, a mother and her 4-year-old daughter. Their names were Samantha and Jasmine Bissay. Samantha was 27, Jasmine was 4. Both were killed. The crime was so brutal that it left a permanent mark on the officers who worked it. This time, Napper made a mistake. He left a fingerprint at the scene. That fingerprint would lead to his arrest, and in 1995, to his admission of responsibility for the Bissay murders. He was sent to Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital. There, psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. And here is the detail that sits at the very center of this case. The detectives investigating the Bissay murders noticed something. A young mother, killed. Extreme violence. A sexual element. The pattern felt familiar, so they raised it with the team investigating Rachel Nickell and suggested the same man might be responsible for both. That suggestion was rejected. According to later accounts, it was rejected with hostility. The Nickell investigation had already decided who its killer was. It had committed, publicly and completely, to Colin Stagg. A theory that pointed at a different man was not welcome, and so the link was pushed away. Step back and look at what was true in that moment, in late 1993. The real killer of Rachel Nickell was in custody. His fingerprint was on file. Detectives had openly suggested he might be her murderer. Everything needed to connect him to her was already inside the police service. And still, it did not happen. The two cases stayed apart. The right man sat in Broadmoor for the Bissays, while the case for Rachel's murder stayed pinned to the wrong one. Which raises a question worth your own answer. The link was right there. Detectives themselves had raised it. So why was it refused? By now, the investigation had committed itself to one man, publicly and totally. To admit the link would have meant admitting that all of it was wrong. The profile, the operation, the arrest, all of it. So how much of this was one team's failure, and how much was simply what happens when a system cannot afford to be seen making a mistake? That failure was about to become permanent, at least for a while. Back in the Nickell case, the collapse of the trial should have forced a reckoning. It did not. For the Metropolitan Police, the failure at the Old Bailey was a public humiliation. They had poured enormous resources into pursuing Colin Stagg. The court had just called their methods improper and told them, in effect, that they could not prosecute him. But the response from the top was not to reconsider. When the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Paul Condon, spoke publicly, he stood by his officers. The clear implication was that the police still believed Stagg was guilty and had simply escaped justice. The message was unmistakable. Even after the case collapsed, the official line was not that they had chased the wrong man, it was that the right man had got away. And if you believe you already had your killer, you do not go looking for another one. So the search for who really killed Rachel Nickell did not restart with any urgency. There was no fresh manhunt. The real killer was, by now, inside Broadmoor for other crimes. In the eyes of the law, he had nothing to do with the murder on Wimbledon Common. For Rachel's family, this was the beginning of a long silence. Her partner Andre had taken their son abroad, first to France, later to Spain. He was trying to build a life for the boy, far from the press and the trauma. The case that had gripped the nation slid quietly into the category of the unsolved. And then, for years, nothing. Robert Napper was in Broadmoor for the Bissay murders. He still denied any part in Rachel's death, and there was still no forensic evidence to prove otherwise. The one physical trace from the scene remained too small and too degraded for the science of the time to read. So it sat, evidence that could not yet speak. The case would not be broken by a detective or a confession or a witness who came forward. If it was going to be broken at all, it would be broken by a change in science. The breakthrough, when it came, did not come from a detective. It came from a laboratory. In 2002, the Nickell case was reopened as a cold case. The physical evidence from 1992 was handed to a new set of forensic techniques, ones that had not existed a decade earlier. The question was simple. Could modern science pull anything from a sample the original investigation had been unable to use? What they found is the quiet heart of this case, and it is more interesting than the way it is usually told. Most retellings simply say that DNA caught him. What actually happened was subtler. One of the scientists central to that work, Angela Gallup, has since described it. The clue was not what they found, it was what was missing. When the team examined the material from the scene, they expected it to be saturated with Rachel's own DNA. It was not, and that absence told them something. If her DNA was not there, something else had taken its place, something hidden inside the sample. Working at the very edge of what was then possible, they isolated a minute trace of male DNA. Then they amplified it. They multiplied that tiny fragment over and over until it was large enough to test. They ran it against Colin Stagg. It was not a match. The science the original investigation never had now confirmed what the collapsed trial had already shown. Stagg was not the killer. Then they ran it against the man detectives had once looked at and set aside. Robert Napper. It matched. There was corroboration too. Tiny flecks of paint, recovered in connection with the case, were matched to a metal toolbox belonging to Napper. Piece by piece, a physical connection that never existed in 1992 was being built in a laboratory instead. In July 2006, detectives traveled to Broadmoor and interviewed Napper over 2 days about Rachel Nickell's murder. He denied it. It no longer mattered. The evidence did not depend on what he was willing to say. In November 2007, 15 years after Rachel Nickell was killed, Robert Napper was finally charged with her murder. The police had the man who did it, but by the time they did, another question had grown too large to ignore. What did justice even mean now, and could any of this have been prevented? A year later, Robert Napper stood in the Old Bailey. On the 18th of December, 2008, he pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Rachel Nickell on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The plea was accepted on the basis of his severe mental illness. He was ordered to be detained indefinitely at Broadmoor, where he already was and where he remains. The judge, Mr. Justice Griffith Williams, told him plainly, he was, on any view, a very dangerous man. 16 years after the murder, the case was, in the legal sense, closed. Through his lawyer, Napper offered an apology to Rachel's family and to Colin Stagg, the man who had spent years living under suspicion for what Napper had done. It is worth being careful about exactly what this outcome was. Napper was not convicted of murder. He admitted manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The court accepted it because of his diagnosed condition. He has not been a free man since. Why did he do it? The honest answer is that no one can climb inside his mind and know for certain. What can be said is only what the record supports. Robert Napper had a deeply troubled history. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia and with a condition on the autism spectrum. The court accepted that his mental state was central to what he did, and his known offending had escalated over time, from the attacks he was linked to in southeast London, to the murders of the Bissays, to the murder of Rachel Nickell. There is no clean motive here, and it would be dishonest to invent one. What the record shows is not a reason, but a direction. A dangerous man becoming more dangerous, moving through a series of victims he should never have been free to reach. In the end, the question was never really why he did it. It was why he was still able to. In 2010, the Independent Police Complaints Commission published its findings on how the case had been handled. The conclusions were damning. Investigators had made a catalog of errors. Opportunities to identify and stop Robert Napper had been missed, not once, but repeatedly, across years. And the report went further than Rachel's case alone. If those opportunities had been taken, it concluded, later attacks might have been prevented, including the murders of Samantha and Jasmine Bissay. At one point, Rachel's partner Andre was shown an official document. It acknowledged that police failings had played a part in her death. And yet, for all of it, no officer was disciplined. By the time the findings landed, the key figures had retired and one had died. The failure was documented. No one answered for it. So return, finally, to where this began. Not to the killer, not to the men who failed to catch him, but to Rachel Nickell. She was 23 years old. She was a mother who took her small son and her dog for a walk in a park she believed was safe. She was failed by the people whose job it was to find who killed her. An innocent man was made to suffer in her name, and the man who did it was left free long enough to take 2 more lives. Her son Alexander survived that morning and grew up carrying it. As an adult, he has spoken about choosing to live rather than to be defined by the worst thing that ever happened to him. He has said he hopes his mother is remembered not for how she died, but as a reason that British policing had to change. That is the better place to leave this. Rachel Nickell was not a cautionary tale, or a case number, or a failure. She was a young woman whose killer was known to the police and missed, and who deserved, from the very beginning, so much better than she got.